many people remember the nursery rhyme, Humpty Dumpty? Right? Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't be put Humpty Dumpty together again. When you think about that little rhyme, Humpty Dumpty's experience is the experience of the human race. We've all had a great fall, and none of us are able to totally put ourselves back together again. But here's the good news. There is a king who can put us back together again. And we read about this king and his work in the Gospels in the New Testament. The Gospels tell us that King Jesus came to repair and restore and reconcile and recreate and heal every dimension of human experience. Jesus is all about putting things back together again. In Matthew chapters 8 and 9, there are 10 examples of King Jesus entering into people's lives and putting things back together again. Over the next several weeks, we're going to look at 7 of those stories. The first story we're going to look at is the first story in Matthew chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8, verse 1 to 4, here's the story. When Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man and said, "I am willing, be clean." Immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. Then Jesus said to him, "See that you don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them." As Jesus came down the mountain from teaching the Sermon on the Mount, that amazing piece of teaching that talks about living in God's kingdom, as Jesus came down from that mountain, as a large crowd followed him, Jesus had an encounter with a man with leprosy. Verse 2, a man with leprosy came and knelt before him. We don't know anything about this man's background, his family, his social life. All we know is this man had leprosy and he had an advanced stage of the disease. We know it was advanced because in Luke's gospel, written by Luke, who was a physician, Luke says of this man that he was full of leprosy. Now, just hearing the word leper or leprosy would have made people back then cringe and run for cover. Of all the diseases in the ancient world, leprosy was most feared. It was a terrible disease. It usually began with a loss of sensation in some part of your body. And then nodules started to form and ulcerate and become all pussy. And then slowly the sufferer would become a mass of these ulcerated, pussy growths. Isn't that nice just before lunch, eh? As the disease progressed, fingers and toes would fall off. It was highly contagious. And because it was highly contagious, the Old Testament, in Leviticus 13 and 14, gave us some regulations in order to control its spread. The Bible actually talked about what to do if you thought you had leprosy. And here's what would happen. If you suspected that you had the disease, you would go to your priest and ask them to examine your skin. No, I don't want to look at anybody's skin after the service. Don't bring it to me. Don't show me. I don't want to see your pus, okay? No, thank you. Yeah. If the priest thought you had leprosy, you would be declared unclean. And that word had a lot of impact. When you were declared unclean, you would have to start wearing torn clothes. You would have to shave your head. You would have to cover your mouth with a cloth so you wouldn't spread the disease. And you would have to, at all times, stay 2 meters away from everyone else. If a person was coming near you or you were coming near a person, you would have to yell out, "Unclean! Unclean!" In that day, a person with leprosy was considered a walking corpse. They were thought to be under a divine curse. They were totally shunned and ostracized and despised. They were completely estranged from all their relationships. If you were a leper, rejection and isolation were a way of life. You were no longer able to go near your family. You were barred from social contact. You were banned from public worship at the temple. You can see why this disease was so feared. And I'm sure you don't have leprosy today, but maybe you've experienced being shunned or ostracized or rejected. Maybe you've been shunned by family members for one reason or another. Maybe you've been rejected by people who you thought were your friends. Maybe you've felt the pain of rejection from a broken love relationship. Maybe deep inside you feel unclean. Not because of anything you've done, but because of what was done to you. The leper was unclean, not because of anything he did, but because he contracted a disease. Maybe you feel unclean because of what's been done to you. If you had an experience like the ones I just described, then you get a small sense of what it was like for this leper. This leper felt cursed, shunned, rejected, ostracized, unclean. He felt less than human. And now somehow this leper heard about Jesus, and that Jesus was going around healing people. And at that moment he had a ray of hope. And he thought to himself, if Jesus is healing other people, maybe, just maybe, Jesus, if I can get to him, will heal me. And so it says in verse 2, a man with leprosy came and knelt before him, knelt before Jesus. Now you have to understand that this leper was taking a huge risk, because remember, around Jesus was a large crowd. And the leper would have to push his way through the crowd and get down and get in front of Jesus and kneel before him. Can you imagine the reaction of the crowd at that moment? This leper, this diseased person, is breaking the rules. He's not supposed to be here. He's not supposed to be amongst us. He's not supposed to be kneeling that close to a rabbi. What's he doing? He's breaking the rules. He's going to make all of us unclean. Can you hear the reaction of the crowd? There would have been a strong sense of anger and rejection aimed at that man kneeling before Jesus. But nevertheless, that leper was determined, because Jesus was his only hope. And so he gets his way through the crowd. He knelt before Jesus and he said, verse 2, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. A couple of thoughts about that statement. First, notice what he was asking for. You can make me clean. Not you can heal me, you can make me clean. Remember, what was he labeled? Unclean. And he said, Jesus, you can make me clean. What would it mean for that leper to go from unclean to clean? It means he would not just experience physical health, but he would also experience relational restoration. He would no longer be isolated or rejected. He would be a father and a husband again. He'd be part of the community again. He could go and socialize again. He could go worship at the temple again. Notice also, second, that this man wasn't wrestling with whether or not Jesus could heal him. The leper did not doubt Jesus' ability to heal. For him, the question was, did Jesus desire to heal him? See, here's this leper. He gets before Jesus and he kneels. Kneeling before the rabbi. He's kneeling. That's a sign that he's kneeling before someone in authority. He's kneeling before the king. And then he looks at Jesus and he says, if you are willing. Those are the words of someone who recognized they were kneeling before a great king. Because no one tells a king what to do. You see, the leper had confidence in Jesus' power, but he also had reverence for Jesus' will. So here's this leper. He's kneeling before the king, and he says, Jesus, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And the crowd is probably backing away. They're shocked. They're angry. And at that moment, all eyes are on Jesus. How is Jesus going to react? Jesus was known as a teacher, as a rabbi. He was known as someone who was supposed to be following the Old Testament law. The only way for Jesus to react was to rebuke this man, shun this man, reject this man, and send this man away. But then Jesus does the unthinkable. Look at verse 3. Jesus reached out his hand and he touched the man. He reached out his hand and he touched the man. He didn't rebuke the man. He didn't reject the man. He didn't tell the man to go away. Rather, Jesus reached out and touched a man that everyone else was angry at, that everyone else wanted to reject. Jesus touched him. In Mark's account of the story, it says that Jesus was moved with compassion. The word compassion there means to have that strong gut feeling. Have you ever had that? You see a situation and you have this feeling in your gut of compassion well up, and when that gut feeling of compassion wells up, it moves you to action. That's what Jesus experienced. And Jesus was moved to do something, and that something would have made everyone else gasp. He reached out his hand, he broke the Old Testament rules, and he touched the man. Jesus, in an act of compassion, reached out his hand and touched a person whom everyone else, including his disciples, had deemed untouchable. Imagine the thoughts of the crowd. Did we just see that? Did he just touch him? He can't touch him. What's he doing? He's breaking the rules. He's made himself unclean. What is he thinking? See, most people would have healed the man first and then touched him. But not Jesus. Not Jesus. Jesus reached out and touched the man before he healed him. Let that picture of Jesus touching that unclean man fill your mind. What do you think that touch meant to the leper? What do you think that touch meant to the leper? He touched me. He just really touched me. I can't believe he touched me. I'm unclean. And I've forgotten what it felt like to be touched by another human being. Imagine the extraordinary sense of love and acceptance that was conveyed in that touch. Imagine the extraordinary sense of love and acceptance that was conveyed in that touch. Once again, we see that Jesus accepts people as they are, where they are. I want to ask you a question this morning. Do you believe Jesus, if he was here, would accept you as you are, where you are? I think a number of people think if they encountered Jesus face to face, he would reject them or he would rebuke them for some reason. You know, if Jesus encountered you, you know what Jesus would do? He'd reach out his hand and he'd touch you to show that he loved and accepted you where you are, as you are. And then Jesus said this in verse 3, I am willing, be clean. Look at this, immediately. I looked in the Greek what that word immediately means. Greek was the language in which the New Testament was originally written. You know what it means? Immediately. Immediately he was cleansed of his leprosy. But you got to get this. You're in the crowd. You backed away. You're angry. You're ticked. Now you're angry at Jesus because he's touched this man. And then Jesus says, be clean. And immediately, it's gone. Those pustule, ugly nodules, gone. Fingers and toes are back where they're supposed to be. The man is immediately cleansed. Your mind would be blown if you were there. You'd be saying, what's going on? You see, Jesus not only healed the man physically, he also healed the social dimension of the man's brokenness. Not only was this man's body restored, but his relationships would be restored. His social standing would be restored. He would no longer be an outcast. He could once again go worship in the temple with everyone else. Do you see what's happening here? In that moment, Jesus created a new future for this man. Do you believe that Jesus could create a new future for you? Do you believe that Jesus could create a new future for you? And I want you to notice something here. Jesus didn't pray. Do you notice that? He just spoke 2 words, be clean. 2 words, and the man was instantly healed. And everyone in the crowd, after they got off over the shock of seeing what they've just seen, must have been asking, who is this man and where does he get his authority from? Because it says in the Talmud this, cleansing a leper is akin to raising the dead. They must have been standing there, just absolutely shocked, saying, who is this man? Where does he get his authority? As we move through Matthew 8 and 9, we're going to see that Jesus has authority over all the forces that threaten to shatter us. Sin and disease and oppression and the demonic and the storms of life and even death. And when it came to this leper, Jesus had the authority and Jesus was willing, and because of that, the leper was healed. Do you think Jesus could do that today? Do you think Jesus can heal today? Here's the deal. It's not enough to believe what Jesus did in the past. It's not enough to believe that Jesus healed a leper 2,000 plus years ago. That's not enough. We also need to believe in what Jesus can do now in the present. We need to believe that Jesus is alive and active and willing to work in our midst because he is. We need to believe that today Jesus is still wanting to bring the kingdom of heaven to earth because he does. Listen, if Jesus was willing to heal the leper, and if Jesus is the same yesterday and today and forever, then Jesus is still willing to heal today. Do we believe that, church? You guys gasped better than you answered that question. Do we believe that, church? Jesus wants to touch lives. Jesus wants to heal. Jesus wants to restore. Look at verse 4. Jesus says something kind of strange here. Then Jesus said to him, see that you don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer the gift Moses commanded as a testimony to them. Why would Jesus make that demand? Why would he say, don't tell anybody, but go do this? A couple of reasons. First, he wanted the man to follow the Old Testament requirements. A healed leper needed to have the priest examine him so the priest could certify that he was healed and ritually clean, which means the man then could be restored to his social standing, restored to his relationships, restored to temple worship. And secondly, Jesus wanted the man to go to the priest of the temple, do you notice, as a testimony to them. The man's miraculous healing from leprosy would have been an indication to the religious leaders that the Messiah was at hand, that the Messiah was really in their midst. And I want to tell you that this morning, the Messiah is still here. The Messiah is still in our midst. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, and Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Listen, everyone is broken, not just Humpty. But let me ask you this morning, what is in your life right now that makes you want to cry out to Jesus? What is in your life right now that makes you want to cry out to Jesus? Where in your life right now do you need to experience Jesus' life-giving touch? I'm not sure what that touch will look like for you, but I'm certain that Jesus desires to touch your life. How do I know that? I know that because in the Gospels, Jesus never rejected a person who came to him in and with their brokenness. What brokenness, what pain do you need to bring to Jesus? Let's take that phrase that Jesus said, I am willing, and turn around and make it a question for us. Are we willing to bring our brokenness to Jesus? Are you done hiding? Is it time for healing? Is it time to allow Jesus to start to put you together again? Are you willing, like the leper, to come to Jesus? Are you willing to kneel before him like the leper did and acknowledge that he's king? Are you willing to let him touch your life? Are you willing to let him put you back together again? Jesus healed the leper. Jesus restored him. And Jesus gave him a new future. If then, why not now? If then, why not now? If Jesus healed and restored and gave a new future back then Jesus can heal and restore and give a new future today. And there are people sitting right here in this room now, you're broken. There's a sense of that brokenness inside. And I can tell you, Jesus wants to touch your life. Jesus wants to heal. He wants to restore. He wants to transform. He wants to give you a new future. The question for you is, are you willing to let him? Are you willing to let him? I believe if Jesus did it back then, he wants to do it today. Are we ready to see God work? Let's pray.